morning, everyone. Good to see everybody here this morning. Glad everybody braved all that sunshine out there. Even though it's a little chilly, it's a nice sunny day. We're glad to have you here. We're glad to have you joining us online. Of course, everybody should probably know the routine by now. It's time for us to pray before we do anything else. So let me invite you just to bow your heads. Father, we want to thank you so much for watching over us through another week. You bless us in so many wonderful ways. We couldn't even begin to count them. Help us never to take anything for granted. Life and health and strength and family are so amazing. All gifts that you provide. You're the only one that could keep us. And we're so thankful that you do such a marvelous job. So we want to praise your name for that, just for who you are. And Father, we ask and pray that you would forgive us for missed opportunities, short-sightedness, just for allowing the human nature to come to the surface. We ask that you forgive us for our sins. Help us to be more like you. Help us to reflect your character more fully, that others around us might see really what you're like. And we pray, Lord, that in doing that, you'll be using us to finish the great work that was started, the wonderful plan of salvation so many thousands of years ago. We're praying this morning as we go through our time together in your word that your Spirit will be here to impress, be here to guide and direct us. We're thankful for each person here. We're asking a special blessing for each one and their families. And Lord, be with all those who join us online, those who watch the program at another time. We're lifting you up for the world to behold and asking that their lives might be changed. So thank you for using us in that way. And thank you, Lord, for the promise that you're coming soon. Help us to be ready for that time. And we ask these mercies in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen and amen. Amen. Okay, so this week I think we're going to go ahead and start another story. We get used to that. This will definitely make Larry's day. So,
we're doing a little book this time.
So I'll let Rose go ahead and turn it over to her and let her introduce which one we're going to look at.
This one's called The Miracle of the Seventh Day Ox. And I believe it's set in Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken. Nikolai Panchuk stared at the four walls of the jail cell around him. The cold gray concrete made him feel as if he was in a tomb, cold and frightened and alone. What would become of him? What was to be his fate? He had refused to cooperate with the KGB thus far, refused to betray the whereabouts of yet another fledgling church he had helped organize only a month ago. It wasn't a large church, just a company of believers in the city of Kiev, the capital of the Ukraine. But Nikolai had refused to turn over a list of the members to the KGB. And who could blame him? The gospel message was spreading so fast that every few months, Nikolai was forming yet another company of believers. At present, he was shepherd and pastor of 11 such congregations. Groups typically met to worship in houses and cellars and barns, but 15 or 20 members seemed to be the magic number before the group was considered too large. The places where they met were just too small to hold more than that number, and everyone loved the close-knit family feeling they experienced from being part of a company of Christians. Nikolai leaned back against the cold wall of the prison cell and closed his eyes. The peace that came from worshiping with like believers was more than enough to pay for the pain and hardship he had faced during the past few months. It wasn't easy, but he was getting used to it. 5 times now, the KGB had cornered him to find out information about the Seventh-day Adventist church members who were meeting together in scattered companies in the towns and small villages of the area. Twice they had come to his house, and 3 times they had used a public confrontation to humiliate him and make him talk. The KGB needed that crucial list of church members. Without it, everything was a hit-or-miss operation for them, like sifting for needles in the chaff of a haystack. Fortunately for Nikolai, the KGB in the area where he lived were decent enough to leave his family out of it. Other pastors in Russia had not been so lucky. He had heard terrible stories of what they sometimes did to get pastors to talk. But Nikolai always remained steadfast and determined in his promise to leave everything in God's hands. His faith was strong. He would not betray the church members and their trust, no matter what the cost to himself or his family. But this time the interrogation process was different. It was obvious the KGB had something else in mind for him. When he had first arrived at the headquarters, they sat him in a chair and kept him awake for more than 2 days. They had used the bright lights in his eyes, shouting tactics, and even threats of where they might send him to help straighten him out. But all to no avail. He had remained undaunted and unmovable. Their tactics did not intimidate him, but unfortunately they were more than persistent. They were determined. What was to come next was anybody's guess, although Nikolai felt it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. He was considered an enemy of the state. Christians were high on the list of rebels who needed to be reformed and retooled for society. If they could be punished enough, maybe they would finally see the light. Those were the words from the top on down. But Nikolai guessed that few in the upper ranks of the military ever bothered themselves about what actually happened to pastors such as Nikolai. As long as the KGB methods produced results, they cared little about the details. He wondered what time it was. He had no watch, and the scant meals they brought him were the only indications that time was passing, though he was sure he had been in his cell for several days now. For him, the time seemed to stand still. Suddenly, he heard footsteps coming down the long concrete corridor. They slowed and then stopped in front of his cell, and he could hear a hand fumbling with a key in the door. "On your feet," a voice barked. Nikolai scrambled to his feet, in time to see a big burly figure fill the doorway. A lone 40-watt bulb burning in the corridor cast eerie shadows past the hulking frame. Nikolai assumed that this man was one of the guards who had been bringing him his meals since he had arrived. "The boss wants to see you." Nikolai waited for the guard to give him specific orders, but the big man simply pulled him into the corridor and pushed him in the direction he wanted him to go. They went up a flight of concrete stairs and then down another hallway till they came to a big room with a large desk and 2 straight-back chairs. Other than that, the only thing in the room was another light bulb burning feebly overhead. Behind the desk sat an intimidating officer in a gray-green uniform. A manila folder lay open on the desk in front of him. He never bothered to raise his eyes when Nikolai walked in, but continued staring at the contents of the folder over his horn-rimmed reading glasses. A shot glass and a bottle of vodka sat on the desk beside him, and a long cigarette dangled from his clean-shaven mouth. Nikolai remained standing, not daring to sit down in the second chair. Whatever was coming next would no doubt be better received standing up. "Preacher man," the officer threw out the expression he had been using on Nikolai for the past several days, "have you given my proposition some more thought?" The officer still did not look Nikolai in the eye, and he was grateful for it. Eye contact was a code of intimidation with the KGB. If a prisoner should respond with such a gesture of the eye contact of his own, it was understood that the victim was finally ready to come to some kind of agreement. And for Nikolai, that was impossible. He knew that he could never bring himself to agree to the KGB's terms that he reveal the list of church members in his district. Never in 1,000 years. But the officer was waiting, and Nikolai knew there was nothing for him to do except tell the boss exactly what he had told him before. His mind was made up. There would be no compromise, no deal. For Nikolai, there was no other choice, and he knew the officer would soon grow impatient because of it. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't comply. My God and my conscience won't allow it." The officer pushed Nikolai's folder away and folded his arms across his chest. Nikolai kept his eyes fixed on the wall behind the officer's head, but he could tell the man was staring at him over the tops of his glasses, and it made him nervous. And that's the end of chapter 1. Should we do another chapter, or they're all
Yeah,
short?
that was awful short.
It's only 10:40.
Okay, we got it in a couple of minutes. "Is that all you have to say for yourself?" the officer growled. Nikolai hesitated only a moment. "Sir, that is my final decision." The officer shook his head. "You're serious, aren't you?" He took the cigarette from his mouth and tapped a long string of ashes onto the floor. "I am, sir." "You are a stubborn man." The officer shook his head again and sighed in frustration. "We've used all the usual methods and forms of diplomacy we know. He put the cigarette back into his mouth and took another long drag from it. I wish you were on our side, preacher man. It would make my job so much easier. Preacher man. Nikolai dared to smile at the nickname the officer had given him. And diplomacy? Their process of interrogation was anything but diplomatic. Victims of the KGB had choices all right, but they were one-sided. Either allow yourself to be persuaded and comply, or else pay the piper. The officer finished his cigarette and poured a shot glass of vodka. Surprisingly, he extended the glass in Nikolai's direction, but Nikolai declined with a simple, "Thank you, sir, but I don't drink." The officer grunted and set the glass down roughly, spilling half of the vodka on the file folder in front of him. And his mood quickly turned from warm to sour. "Well, I can see that I'm getting nowhere fast, preacher man. I've got more important things to do than waste my time here with you." He raised his voice. "I might as well be talking to the wall for all the good this conversation is doing. We've kept you awake, hammering at you incessantly, but you won't break. We've offered you bribes and positions in our organization. We've even been willing to concede some of the restrictions we've put on you during past encounters, but you always give us the same answer. It's obvious you're going to be of no help here." He raised a hand to shake his finger at Nikolai. "I am tired of this nonsense. We were hoping to talk to you and make some sense out of this whole situation, but I can see you're more stubborn than ever." He pulled a handkerchief from his uniform pocket and sopped up the spilled vodka before closing the folder. "Your case is out of my hands. My superiors expect results, and if I can't get them, then there's going to be a price to pay." His voice grew calm again. "I like you, Nikolai, but if we can't come to an agreement, there is nothing I can do to save you." It was the first time he had used Nikolai's name since he had come to the prison 5 days before. "I've been instructed to inform you that you are being sentenced to a labor at a prison camp in Siberia. Unless you are ready to answer our questions, there is nothing more I can do." To Nikolai's surprise, the officer stood to his feet and extended his hand. "Good luck, preacher man. May your God be with you." He gestured toward the door and nodded to the guard and sat down again to finish his paperwork. As Nikolai turned to go, he thought he saw a look of pity in the KGB officer's eyes, but he knew he must be mistaken. Officers were known for their hard hearts and their unflinching determination to get information from their victims. He was led back to his cell. As the door clanged shut behind him, he took stock of his situation. Things were not looking good. There was no doubt that he had made the right decision, but at what cost? He had no idea how long he would be sentenced to the frigid wastelands of Siberia. Years, decades, until he died. He cringed as he thought of the dreaded sentence so frightening to any prisoner's ears. Banishment to the Siberian frontier. Summer temperatures in Siberia could be cool and damp, with swarms of black flies and huge bloodthirsty mosquitoes everywhere. And with no towns or settlements in that wasteland, he had heard that escape was impossible. There was little chance of survival should a prisoner even attempt to make an escape. But it was the winters in Siberia that were the most fearsome. Temperatures sometimes dropped to 50 degrees below zero, and with the biting wind that chased its way across the Northland, living conditions were almost unthinkable. He shivered in his cell just thinking about the prospects of such a future. There was still time for him to rethink the whole thing, time to change his mind and escape the fate he had been handed. But of course he knew that he would never do. He could not. It was against everything he had ever believed in and stood for all his life. Allegiance to God in his life was the most important thing now. The KGB would take away his pulpit. They could take away his freedom and even his health, but they could never take away his choice to serve God and be true to him. And now, at the recommendation of the secret police, the government was going to exile him to an outpost prison in Siberia. It was a heavy price to pay, but he had no doubt in his mind that God was going to be with him. He would not give up his resolve to guard his church members' names, and he would continue to speak for God no matter where he lived. He would witness for God no matter what it cost him. And who knew, maybe the Holy Spirit could use him to do even greater things for God than he was already doing. Time would tell. And that's the end of chapter 2. So these are shorter chapters than the other book.
Really short chapters.
Yeah, well, it's a short book. It's only 125 pages. But somebody recommended it. I've had two or three people recommend we use this one. So since I could get it on Kindle, I got this one first.
confronted with the same old thing.
We will be.
Yep, more than likely, according to Scripture, that's the direction things will go.
For strength to see.
Sometimes folks don't recognize that we're kind of caught in the middle of a supernatural warfare, so circumstances and events take place that put us in the middle of those predicaments. But what's the most important thing that you learn from the story?
Be true.
Yeah, remaining true to what you believe in.
Right.
Talking about
who you
truly
believe-
believing it.
and who you believe in. I mean, God obviously gives us the strength to go through things like that. And of course we have the promise. What's the promise of Scripture that's important here?
But God
He'll never leave us nor
never
forsake
leave
us.
Well, He won't allow anything more than what you can handle, more than what He knows you can handle. You may not think you can handle it, but God knows us better than we know ourselves.
Now, this book here is about Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah.
Good book,
Is it?
good choice.
Good choice. Yeah, right.
I picked out 3 of them, so we should have enough reading for stories for the first half of the year now.
I'm glad to hear.
We will take time to do some of the current events as well. All right. Okay, where did we stop last week? Those that were here, we started getting into chapter 13 of the book of Matthew, right? Where we have several parables that were being introduced. And in verse 34 there, he talked about why Jesus was going to use parables. Remember we were discussing the fact that parables were being used during this time by the rabbis. And so that wasn't anything unusual. But now for Jesus to use parables himself, that seemed to be maybe a little unusual to the disciples because they specifically came and asked him about them, right? It says in verse 34, all these things Jesus spoke to the multitude in parables, and without a parable he did not speak to them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. And he quotes from Isaiah 77. And it says, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things kept secret from the foundation of the world. And what did we learn about that particular verse there? Was God trying to intentionally keep information hidden, secret, so that the people could not grasp it?
Well, that kind of sounds like what he was saying.
Yeah, on the surface it seems like people
He
come
always
to
told
that.
the disciples later when they come to him and ask him questions.
Yeah. When somebody speaks kind of a riddle, what does that cause you to do? Because
Think.
well, it causes you to think about things a little more closely. One of the things that we have to remember with the plan of salvation is that there was an element within the plan of salvation that was so critical that it was kept in seclusion until after the fact. Right? And we've looked at 2 Corinthians 1 before. I'm just trying to help you realize that the whole plan of salvation was so ingenious that there was one particular element that had to be kept somewhat hidden from the mainstream in order for it to be carried out. And of course, then there were other things that were just not noticed over time that people lost insight of. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, let's see. It was 1 Corinthians chapter 2.
Just dyslexic as me.
Yeah, it's First Corinthians, sorry about that. 1 Corinthians 2, not 2 Corinthians 1. The chapter starts out with the subtitle, Christ Crucified. It says, it says, "And I, brethren, when I came to you, did not come with excellence of speech or of wisdom, declaring to you the testimony of God, for I determined not to know anything among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified." So that's how Paul starts out chapter 2 there. And as you read down further, he talks about, in verse 6 it says, "However, we speak wisdom among those who are mature, yet not the wisdom of this age, nor the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God ordained before the age for our glory." So Paul says, I'm going to bring out some things here that have been kind of hidden, that have escaped your notice. That's actually kind of what the word means there. They escape the notice of most people. And it says here, which none of the rulers of this age knew, for had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So there are parts of the plan of salvation that were so sensitive that God couldn't even really expose them until after the fact, because if He had, then the enemy would have tried to prevent certain things from happening. And what I'm specifically referring to, this mystery, this particular mystery here, was the fact that not only did Messiah have to yield His life and His blood had to be shed, but there had to be an application of that blood. I had someone this week, I had sent a copy of our new book to a publisher, and the president of that company sent me an email this week, and he said, I found some of these points that you brought up to be most insightful. He said, I'd never thought about the fact that during the Passover, remember the Passover, they were to take the lamb and sacrifice the lamb, and then they were to take the blood and apply the blood to the doorposts, remember? So that when the angel came by that night, the angel would pass over that home. That home would be protected. It was under the blood, so to speak, under the application of the blood. Well, in the book I bring out the fact that what if the father, who was the priest of the home there, what if the father had slain the lamb and then just took it outside and put it on the front step so that the angel of death could see that the sacrifice had been made? Would the firstborn in that home be secure?
No.
And this is what the book brings out, the rationale there. The firstborn in that home would still perish, right? And why?
Because it wasn't applied.
Okay, because the blood
was
wasn't
not
applied.
applied.
Right. And so the application of the blood was just as critical as the shedding of the blood. But yet within current thinking in Christianity, we look at just the death of Jesus or the shedding of His blood as being the answer that secures us for salvation. And that's only part of the answer, right? It's a necessary part, but it's only part of the answer. And this guy wrote back and he said, that's just an amazing example. And he said, I really had to question whether or not just the death of Jesus or the shed blood of Jesus was enough to accomplish the atonement. And so that's the point that was being made, right? Mm-hmm. There was more going on there than we currently have been promoting.
Well, that's what the whole tabernacle service
The tabernacle
illustrated.
service.
You know, the sinner didn't just bring the offering there and have it slain. The priest had to take that blood in and apply it in the tabernacle. If he didn't do that, the sins weren't recorded and forgiven.
And the person actually stood there and waited for the priest to go and make that application. The person would not leave until that blood was taken in and applied to the veil, because there had to be a record, right? In fact,
and the horns.
Right. That book brings out the fact that this is really a legality. This is a courtroom proceeding, if you will. There had to be evidence, physical evidence, presented that the sacrifice actually took place, etc. Okay, so there was a record that was established.
Well, what good would a trial be to find someone guilty if there's no punishment? I mean, that's where it ends, if there's no application of the of the sentence, what
And
good is it?
yeah, and punishment is based on evidence, you see, so the evidence is very important.
Well, the conviction is based on
The
it.
conviction is based on evidence. So, you know, all of this, so it's just interesting that here in Scripture, we find that had the rulers of the day known what this mystery was that Paul's talking about here, they would have never crucified the Lord. They would have never put him up there to make the application possible. And that's really what happened when they put him up on the cross right above where the ark had been hidden. They didn't recognize, of course they didn't know any of that, right? So they didn't understand. But of course God had written the script, and so it's all playing out according to what God had planned. And so at Calvary you had not only the yielding of his life, which opened up the ground, but you also had him as the priest, him as the high priest, making an application of the blood onto the mercy seat below. You see? So it's absolutely phenomenal what God set in motion that was unknown to the people that were there.
It was unknown to Satan what was going to happen.
It was unknown, exactly. You see. So obviously what Scripture is saying here is if they had known that, they would have tried to prevent that from happening. You see. And what Jesus brings out in Matthew here is that there are other things. It says, I will open my mouth in parables, plural. I will utter things, plural, kept secret from the foundation of the world. In other words, things that there will be other things that people would not notice, that would just lay in obscurity for centuries, and then finally people would catch on and things would become apparent. Psalm 25:14 says, basically says, the secret things of the Lord belong to them that fear him or respect him, and it says, and I will show them my covenant. Okay?
He said, it is for you to know.
For you to know.
Them not to know.
The masses, right.
Right.
That's what it says here. So they're asking, why do you do this? And Jesus comes out specifically, and he says that because you need to know, have a lot of this insight. The multitudes don't necessarily need it at this point.
And why?
Yeah, why do you think that would be?
Because they weren't doing God's will. They weren't going out and doing the preaching.
Yeah.
They were doing the listening.
Well, we have to remember too, when Jesus came, was the church, i.e. the church, was his people following the truth that had been revealed through the patriarchs and prophets? Were they following the truth?
No.
They weren't really. What had they fallen into?
They fell into a regular routine of tradition.
Of tradition.
They were waiting on Jesus to come to take over, not do what he come to do, but be their king.
They only had the picture of the here and now. They didn't have a picture that there was a bigger plan.
Sure, and so they had also been taught that the Messiah would come and release them from the Roman yoke, the Roman bondage, set up his kingdom, and of course they were all planning on being, the significant people within that kingdom, even vying for who's going to sit on his left or right, that kind of thing. But it was much more than that he needed to get across to his early disciples if the message of Christianity was going to survive for the next 2,000 years. Remember, this is a dispensation that's going to begin, the Christian dispensation, beginning in 34 AD. So he's got to make sure they have a good foundation on which to launch this new dispensation of truth. And it's going to be different. What's the main difference between the Christian dispensation that started in 34 AD and the Jewish dispensation that ended at the same time? What's the difference there?
The Jewish was for the Jews only, but the Christian dispensation at the stone of Stevens went to the Gentiles, so in other words went to the whole entire world.
So it's when the atonement was accomplished. That's the main difference that stands out to me.
Well,
I don't know. I don't think that there was a different system. I think that God wanted to reach those outside Judaism before.
But he was going
But
to
they
use,
just didn't
but
want
he
him
was
to do
supposed
it.
to have used the Jews to do it, and the Jews refused. They had the truth, sort of like said in the Adventists, They got the truth they want to keep, but, you know.
Well, they had, if you go look at the history though, initially, they said, oh yeah, Lord, whatever you say we'll do, but they realized very quickly that they couldn't do any of it.
No.
And so then they began to create all these little rules, so you could have these little rules and regulations that would make you feel like you were keeping the law when you weren't really having a change of heart at all. But I think I think his plan was always to take it to the entire world. He never wanted it just for the Jews.
Well, the Jews were supposed to have been the preachers of the world,
Yeah.
and they were supposed to have taken it to the Gentiles.
They turned it
They
down.
refused to take it to the Gentiles because they didn't want to be contaminated by the Gentiles.
But to be fair, you look at their history. They had been seduced by the heathen nations around them time and time again.
Yeah.
And so by the time they came out of Babylonian captivity, they had learned the lesson. They were not going to get their religious beliefs mingled with the beliefs of other religions around them. And so instead of doing any type of evangelism to reach out to the world, they just sealed themselves off.
Yeah. It's important to recognize that the mission has always been the same, right?
The mission has never changed.
From any dispensation, even going all the way back to Adam, you know, the dispensation, the message has always been the same. The plan of salvation has always been sent out to everyone. Paul, his letter to Titus, you know, for the grace of God that bringeth salvation has appeared to all mankind. Okay? So the mission and emphasis was always the same. But when it comes to the atonement, what had the Jews grasped and what was God's intent for the Christian apostle disciples to grasp? They had only basically taken in half of the covenant component. They were walking around with the Ark of the Covenant for a long time. And of course that was what they received at Mount Sinai, the transcript written in stone, that had been pretty much drummed out of their thinking over hundreds of years in
But
captivity.
they considered themselves the keepers and guardians of the law.
Right. In other words, their understanding of the covenant was between them and between God. God was going to bring his, you know, a covenant's a contract, right? It's just an agreement. And so, you know, if Kenny and I were sitting here and we're going to have a contract, you know, he brings something to the table, I bring something to the table, we agree on it, we sign off on it, and it's a done deal. The Jews felt like God was bringing his law to the table, and then they were going to bring their obedience to the law as their part. And that was a misunderstanding, right? That was a misconception. There's nothing that humanity could contribute that would make the covenant relationship more viable, okay? More successful. There's no part that we could add to it. It's just like our conception. When we're conceived, you know, we had nothing to do with that. Not a thing. It was our parents and the gift of God. Totally, we had nothing to do with our conception. Well, the Jews misunderstood the covenant promise and the covenant relationship. They thought it was between them and God, and they were going to bring obedience to the table. He was bringing his law to the table, and that is why they ended up concocting all of these laws, a positive and negative law for every day of the year. Okay? Because they were going to be certain, they were going to guarantee that they were in compliance. Every little T was crossed, every little I was dotted. They were going to be in total compliance with God's law, even the ones that they manufactured. But what does the covenant promise actually entail? The ultimate, the true covenant promise in terms of salvation really is between the Father and the Son. And it's what they would do together totally with the cooperation of course, the Holy Spirit and angels and all that kind of thing. It's what heaven would do to accomplish salvation for humanity. We would just have to cooperate with the process. But the two elements that were being highlighted were not only the law, but what was the other thing?
The blood.
The blood. Okay? And of course, what that meant was the substitutionary sacrifice of the Messiah. And those two things would come together in covenant marriage or covenant promise. And that took place in reality at Calvary. Right? But of course, the Jews, what did they do? They accepted the law, but they rejected the blood. So they were willing to have half the equation, but they rejected the other half. God's intention for the Christian dispensation was that they would take both and they would move forward, presenting both of those components to the world, the law and the blood. And we've come to understand that that was a symbol, those things were symbolic of His two offerings that would be necessary to accomplish salvation and redemption. And so,
But you see what they were doing? They were accepting the law, doing away with the blood.
right.
We accept the blood, but do away with the law.
Well, that's what happened, and then you can imagine, of course, after the fact, that the enemy of God realized that, I'm sure that even Satan was saying, "Are you kidding? What God had to do here to make salvation available for humanity? He's gone to this length. I've got to distort that picture." He had to distort that picture, and so he's always distorted the picture by having us grasp just half of the equation. And so what you're saying is true.
But even
Eventually, the Christians developed to the place where they said, "Well, we're taking the blood, we're accepting the death of Messiah, but we're pushing the law away."
the law was done away with the cross. So.
Yeah, so they came up with that, but that was probably centuries later that actually developed.
So what is both sides doing? Now, both of them are trying to make it by works.
Yes.
See,
Yeah.
both of them are doing the same identical thing. They're both trying to make it by works.
Right. So one ultimately is no better than the other.
Well,
When,
the Jews thought this was just for them anyway, and that they didn't know that, I guess, that they were supposed to take the gospel to the world, so they turned it down, and God said, "Behold, I turn to the Gentiles, since you count yourself unworthy to do this."
There was a perfect example that God established when He took His people into the Promised Land. Now remember, Moses and Aaron and Miriam are leading them through the wilderness, right? And they've been out there for 40 years, but eventually they come to the Promised Land, Kadesh Barnea. And they're going to cross, of course, the Jordan, and they're going to go into the Promised Land, etc., at the appropriate time. But even though Moses and Aaron have really paid their dues, so to speak, and been very successful and faithful leaders, they made a mistake at Kadesh Barnea where they struck the rock. Remember, God told them to speak to the rock, and Moses ends up striking the rock.
He got mad and hauled on and hit it.
Right. Took his staff and he hit it. All right, so...
But what did he say? He said, "I will
Right.
give you water."
Sure, he was frustrated because of the attitude of the people.
And he took God's power and authority.
Right. So he was not going to be allowed to go into the Promised Land, and God chose a successor for him. And who was the successor?
Joshua.
It was Joshua.
Or
And,
Jesus.
or in the Hebrew, that's Yeshua, right? Yeshua, Joshua. And so they're still carrying around the Ark of the Covenant with them. And so when they go into the Promised Land, they don't go in with just the law. They go in with Yeshua leading them in and the law. So they go in with the blood and the law together. And that's a perfect illustration of where God wanted to, that's the message that He wanted to take and present to the world. The only way that any of us, and we're all on the same journey, we're all on the very same journey headed toward the Promised Land. But we're only going to go in with the law and the blood. Okay? When you go into the book of Revelation, you find chapter 14 and 15, you find that the 144,000, those living at the very end of time, they learn that song. They learn the song of the atonement, the song of Moses and the Lamb, the song of the law and the blood. So God is only going to carry out the epilogue in this great drama after people have an understanding of what it really cost heaven to save us. Right? It cost not only His human sacrifice from His human nature, but it also cost Him a sacrifice from His divine nature. And that really goes way beyond what we typically think of when we think of what heaven had to do to save us. It's way off the chart. So, Bruce.
I'm going to go back to what you said about the end of a Jewish thing and the beginning of it. What was that you said?
Yeah, the Jewish probationary period for the Jews as a nation to take the gospel to the world ended 34 AD with the stoning of Stephen.
And your question was?
The question was basically, what hadn't they grasped concerning what the covenant promise
What happened
entailed?
there, I think, something like that you said. What was the difference between one and the other?
Right, exactly.
All right, so here's what I see happening cycling through history. A group of people grab onto what they believe God is saying, and either someone is appointed or hired to maintain their understanding of that, taking it out of the hands of the mortals, regular people, to the point where it's so, it evolves and evolves, or devolves, I'll say, to the point where it's barely recognizable from what it was before.
Absolutely true.
Jesus came and he turned the tables over and he threw people out. Now, different groups have done this throughout history. Catholic Church has taken the blood and turned it into a cup and some bread. And they say, as long as you do this, you're okay. That's a distortion. And it has taken it, and who applies it? It's someone up there who's got, you know, the halo above their head. And common people,
Good point. Good
common
point.
people are only receive it as opposed to experiencing it in their lives. And all, there's this structure that's built around the symbols of, instead of the reality of what God originally intended. There's a thing in Rome, they built this whole thing. God, he's got a political structure that spans the world.
They even build on traditions, yeah.
And you know, it's built on tradition that they built up. So the difference between the law and the blood, they expand the law, and they try to expand the blood, and they try to keep control of both of them, and translate them to their own purposes. And one group after another has taken it, and the people fall out and say, no, I can't do that. Or they just sort of blindly follow it, and they lose the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what happened at that point. God said, okay, to Jews, it's not working. It ain't working. What you doing? I'm gonna throw you out of the temple.
I hadn't thought of that.
Throwing you out of the temple, and we're gonna kind of start this over. Now let's go back to square one.
It was a reboot, no question.
It's a reboot.
Yeah.
And let's look at this again. Come on out, I'm gonna stand on the hill and talk to you for a while. And they talked the whole thing through again. And then they brought it back to the level of common people. That's what happened, I think, at that crossroads in time.
Yeah.
That happened again in the Reformation.
The
When
Reformation.
priests like Martin Luther, who got into the scriptures, suddenly said, this system is not the one.
The Catholics created a system. The
Right.
Reformation created another system. The Orthodox Church created another
Yes,
one.
they did.
And I'm thinking of an example in my head here. I used to go pick frankincense off of trees, and I brought some home and put it on the wood stove at Christmas. So I know what this stuff smells like. But if you go to a Catholic or Orthodox church today, it's hard to get this stuff. You don't just go out and pick it off a pine tree. It's got to come from someplace else. And so to stretch it out, they'll put some paper in with it. And this stuff doesn't smell like real frankincense. Most people don't see this or smell, they don't know this. But I've been there, done that. And so what the priests are putting out there as frankincense isn't. What they're putting out there as salvation very often isn't. What you smell and what you see and what you hear ain't always true.
Yeah, there's
Very
no,
important points.
yeah, there's no question that, you know, the enemy has a lot to gain by causing all that confusion and manipulation.
They water down the frankincense, they water down
And
the salvation.
water down the
That's a
truth.
great illustration.
Yeah, they really do. Jesus has come here to, of course, clarify. What's amazing to me is that even after his death at Calvary, the Lord tarries for another 3.5 years to give the Jewish people, especially the leadership, an opportunity for that clarity to try to sink in as it opposes, you know, where they have gone in their thinking and their tradition. But once they start to persecute and kill the early leaders of the church, and Stephen particularly, Deacon Stephen, that was kind of the last straw. And God said, okay, you know, you guys aren't going to get it, so let's move on and reboot and get back on the straight and narrow path here. So, but where have we come in the last 2,000 years?
It's all over the place now.
I mean, yeah, truth is truth, and it can hold its own. But there are so many voices out there.
It's almost a pendulum swing. You know, when in the time of Jesus, you had the rich young ruler who came and, you know, said and claimed he had kept all of the law perfectly since his youth. And then Jesus, with one question, one instruction, shows that he hasn't kept it at all. Well, then today you have a whole group of Christians who don't need the law, and they say, it's just grace. You just do what you want. You're once saved, you're always saved. And so they've taken it the other license. You know, the Jews, if you obey all of these things, you'll live. This one is, if you don't do anything, you'll live. So it was still going opposite ends of the spectrum here.
Well,
Yeah.
that doesn't justify the way they live.
That's
And-
human nature.
And actually, Jesus, we kind of looked back. I'm just going to flash back here, real quick flashback to chapter 7 of Matthew. What you just said there, Rose, is recorded right here. It says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, done many wonderful works? Well, there, of course, are many that will try to stand on that aspect of the works aspect, which is insufficient. And then 23 says, and then I will declare unto them. And we're talking about two groups. We're talking about the people that just say, Lord, Lord, thinking that that's going to suffice. Others that think they're going to work their way in. That won't suffice. Jesus says unto them, I never knew you. You know, because you didn't know me. You didn't really know, you didn't really grasp what the whole thing was about. You believed what someone told you. You didn't investigate for yourself to find out. So you've got these two extremes, and the devil will be quite content for anybody to be in either of those extremes. And it's actually, you know,
Right in the middle.
pardon me?
Right in the middle.
Okay, then, all right. Then what is my responsibility? If I do this, I'm working to get in. If I don't do anything, I mean, you know, what is my responsibility? I'm sitting here right now. What is my responsibility to make it into the kingdom of heaven?
Well, actually, I just read
Revelation
it. Didn't I just read it there?
But again, too,
He who
you're
does
talking
the will.
about works.
He who does the will
Jesus
of the
says,
Father.
my
that
sheep hear my
works?
voice.
What's the motive, though?
Ah, what was it? What was that?
You heard it.
What was the motive?
What was the motive?
See, no matter what you do, in order to make it, there's going to be works involved. But the works, what is the motive for the works?
You think you're gonna get in heaven free, Larry?
See, that's just it right there, you see. There's going to be a work. There's works.
Jesus said it best. He said,
See,
if you
it all
love me,
boils down to the motive.
if you love me, that's the motive, right? If you love me, you will honor my commandments, or you'll keep my commandments. I mean, God has provided instruction for his people, right? That's his will, right? That's what it says, if you follow his will. It's his instruction. So if we ignore His will, what's going to happen? What's going to be the result if we ignore God's will? Okay, we've just gone off on our own direction, like Cain said. I don't care what God requires. I'm going to do what I feel like doing. Right? But what was Abel doing? Abel believed in God's plan, and he brought the appropriate offering.
Did they have a,
See,
he was sacrificing a lamb, right?
right,
Yes.
blood.
Right.
He was shedding blood.
He was shedding blood. Did they have a tabernacle for him to
No, he just made an altar.
just,
Yeah, just an
Built
altar.
an altar.
Well,
See, there were
technically, the
always-
application was made at the altar because when the offering was accepted, fire would come down and consume it in the early years. That's what was recorded, was that God's approval. That's how Cain knew his offering wasn't accepted. His offering wasn't consumed, but Abel's was.
See, there will always be works involved. You can't make it without works. But what is the purpose of the works? What is the motive behind the works? That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, that you're not doing it to be saved, you're doing it because
Because
you
you are saved, you see.
Right. There's
Show
the
me your
difference.
faith by your works.
There's the difference. Yeah, that's the true concept of faith and works together. Okay, it's a hand in glove thing. If you're truly following the will of God, the fruits of that labor will be evident.
He said you'll know by the fruit tree.
Right. But you can't get the cart before the horse.
as you have been doing to you.
Okay.
That's,
Go to Matthew 13:44. We didn't really expound too much last week. We only got, I think, over to 44 there. But here are two short parables, just one verse each. 44, actually the second one's 44 and 46, 45 and 6. Verse 44 says, "Again the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid, and for joy over it he goes and he sells all that he has and he buys that field." And 45 and 6, very similar. It says, "Again the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, but when he found one pearl of great price, went and sold all he had and he bought it." And so, what's he talking about here?
I think he's talking about truth.
the joy of truth, the joy of, or the value of truth.
Yeah, the value of truth. I mean, there's no question here. There's nothing more valuable than the truth of God's Word, because the truth of God's Word reveals the will of God. Nothing more valuable than that. Right?
If it ain't the truth, it ain't worth nothing anyway.
And so, what else is depicted here in these short parables concerning our response? You know, when you're sitting there, you're asking the question, you know, what is my responsibility? You know, what's indicated right here in these verses?
Well, if you
Well,
sell
they had the
everything you
deed.
have, if you sell everything you have to get it, then that means it's worth being your top priority, the highest and best that you do.
What are you willing to give up
Everything.
in order to get it? That's it.
Yeah, everything.
If you're not going to give up
It's worth-
everything, you're not going to make it.
It's worth everything. Okay? And because, you know, you're obviously eternity is the circumstance that really places it in that category. Everything
Right.
here in our lives is
That was actually the
Temple.
problem that you saw with the rich young ruler. He
right.
thought he had done everything.
Physically, he did.
But the thing is, that last commandment, what's that last commandment?
He wasn't willing to get up.
The last commandment has nothing to do with what you do. It has to do with what you think and, you know, inside. It's an inward commandment. You can't possibly keep all 10 commandments. And I think the Lord's been wanting man to get to that place. You know, the Jews at Sinai, he gives them their commandments, they're scared to death, and they say, we'll do everything you say. Not realizing that humanly, it's not possible to do
Should
everything.
the Lord chuckled at that?
And so he wanted them to get to the place where they realized, this is too big for me. I can't do this. So that they knew they needed him. And that's where the relationship comes in, is knowing that you need something outside yourself.
Well, you see, that's a good point right there. If I could keep the commandments, I don't need Christ. I wouldn't need
You
him.
could be saved by your own
Yeah, by
efforts.
your own works. But you
Well-
can't do it. That's an impossibility.
Right.
It's only through Christ that you can do it.
And he's been trying to get human beings to that point of realizing that he did it, that he will work in us to change our hearts, changing us from the inside out, changing our desires. Like the one pastor said, he prayed, Lord, let what bothers you bother me.
He
You know,
done
it totally
everything.
changed his outlook on everything because he began to realize that all of these pagan practices and junk that was brought in as traditions were just junk. That, you know, that was not honoring him, it was not glorifying him at all to have this junk. Okay, what do you replace it with? The truth. You know, he began to find that truth was there, but it was all part and parcel of his relationship with God. It wasn't something he was doing because he had to do it. Although when you are converted and the Lord takes over, you have to do it. You know, you'll notice you don't have the desire to do
motives
those
have
evil
changed.
things anymore.
But the motives
He
change.
had done everything except take care of, help the poor.
That's true.
And you mentioned earlier the extreme position of that, and what you're talking about, of course, is Christ our righteousness, having faith in what the Father and the Son, the covenant between the Father and the Son, having faith in what they've done to accomplish salvation for us.
Which was the cornerstone for Martin Luther.
Right.
When he realized, here he is crawling up the
Righteousness by
steps to the
faith.
Vatican on his knees and realizing all of a sudden he hears the just shall live by faith.
Right.
And it's like all of a sudden the door opens. This is not what does it. It's faith in what he's done.
Right. And of course, an extreme position that you mentioned earlier, once the idea of once saved, always saved. Just because we come to the conclusion that we can't do in our own strength, we can't accomplish God's will. We have to and of course that he did it for us. That doesn't give anybody a license to go out and live as they choose, does it?
Right.
Okay, and that's the extreme. A lot of people will say, "Well, Jesus did it, so I don't have to," and so they'll go out and live any way they want to live, not realizing that there's an accountability also in understanding that he paid the price, that he's our righteousness.
Well, just because your
what-
friend doesn't praise to you.
In other words, if he's our righteousness, we ought to want to be. That ought to drive us more fervently toward him, and we ought to follow his example. Okay.
Yeah, JD had shared that when we know the truth, then we understand that it's our reasonable service.
Yeah, and if the truth sets us free, what does it set us free from?
Sin.
From sin, from things that defile, you see, from bad habits.
He
choices.
told us in the Old Testament what he wanted to do was take out our heart of stone and
Stone.
replace it with the heart of flesh,
Yeah.
so that his law was written on the heart,
Right.
so that we loved what he loved and we hated the things he hated. That's really what he wants, is a heart transplant.
Sure.
He wants us to have that so that our mind changes. So, because once you stop loving those things, you know, it's a whole world of difference. You know,
Sure.
there are people out there who love smoking. You know, and for them, if they quit smoking, every smell of that smoke is a reminder of something that they wish they still had. Because they didn't stop loving it, they just stopped doing it. When you get to the place where you no longer love it, it becomes offensive to you. It becomes something disgusting. You can't stand the smell of it anymore. So it's that heart change that takes place when you realize this stuff is killing me and it's not worth it.
Right. One of the references for that's Ezekiel 36, and it states in there emphatically, God saying, "I will do this for you. I will take that stony heart out, and I will replace it with a heart of flesh." It says, you know. So it's something that God has to totally do. We cooperate in that process. How about the parable, the next one down, 47 there? Kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet, or like a
Fishing net.
fishing net that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which when it was full, they drew it to the shore. They sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but threw the bad away. It will be so at the end of the age. The angels will come forth, separate the wicked from the just, cast them into the furnace of fire. There'll be wailing and gnashing of teeth.
The next verse.
Yeah, Jesus said unto them,
Have you understood all these things? And they said, yes, Lord. They didn't understand it. They didn't understand the thing he was telling them.
And so this particular parable here is very similar to the one over there where
With the tares.
he
Mine
explains the
says, yeah,
tares,
Lord.
right?
Yeah.
And so you find him using different parables to really illustrate important truths, the same important truth. What's some of the things you can pick out from here? What's happening here?
I was just going to say that I think another interesting point is that it also seems like a parable that kind of tells about how we are to sort truth. You know, is that you might take everything up in this huge dragnet, but then you have to sort it out for yourself and go, this is not good, that is good.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, and what ability is in play in doing that?
discernment.
Discernment.
To tell that
right.
this isn't the fish you
Discernment.
want.
Right.
This is a pufferfish.
There are a lot of people that I remember John MacArthur talking about a story. For those of you that know him, just a preacher from out in California. But I remember him telling the story. He was traveling across the country, he and his wife, and they used to see these signs on these back roads. They see these signs, quilts for sale. And his wife wanted a quilt, so they stopped into this one house, and the woman had these beautiful quilts, but it was a patchwork type quilt. You know how they are, just all kinds of pieces of fabric, didn't really make any rhyme or reason, just
Crap.
scrap type stuff, And he said while he was sitting there, he started noticing, on the table different things, studies and literature from various organizations. And after talking with this gentleman in his home, he said he termed it a patch quilt theology, because he had a little bit of this here, he had a little bit of this here, and he had some of this and some of that and some of that. It was kind of all jumbled together in this, whatever you want to call it, this patch quilt theology. And he was just making the point that the Bible is a book that explains the will of God. And so it's going to be pretty definitive, right? What's one of the definitive things that we see him really bringing out in this parable here? There's going to be a separation. When does the separation occur?
At
At the
the,
harvest.
Okay, the separation occurs at the end of the age. Isn't that what it says here?
The end of the world.
Right. The angels will come forth, separate the wicked from among the just, etc. This is so it will be at the end of the age. A lot of people.
Wait a minute. When you say the end of the age, exactly when are you saying? What are you talking about?
The end of the
King James
the
said end of the
probation?
world.
end of the world.
Yeah.
This is the new
End
King
it
James.
close probation?
Yes. Yeah. So when probation closes, every case has been decided, right? The same thing happened at Noah's Ark. When you go back and look at the story of Noah,
Well, will the angels come and separate them before God, Jesus comes? Because when he comes,
It's finished.
everything is gone.
Technically they do, because only the righteous are raised and the wicked are slain by the brightness of his coming.
Right.
That's a separation.
yeah, we have the example, of course, of the Ark, Noah's Ark, where the boat itself is being used as the instrument or the vessel that creates the separation. Noah and his family go on the boat. Everybody else stays off, even though they're invited to come on. And then, of course, God closes the door. He closes the door. They're sealed in, and then the rest are sealed out. So there's your closing.
There was that period of time where that door was open and nothing was happening before it started to rain.
Right.
Sit there
They had
7 days.
7 days they had the opportunity to get on the boat.
Sure.
But of course, once the rain started to fall, then they all wanted on. But by then the door had shut, so
The door being closed.
too
So
late.
even in these parables here, you have important, theological type of issues that are being presented here. Many people think today, many Christians think today, that the separation has been ongoing, right?
Yeah,
That
because
there's
every
been
time
a
you go
separation
to-
going on for all through history. But Scripture brings out, not only in the tares bring out the same thing. The separation really takes place at the end of the age.
Well, but it also, on the other hand, it still there is a separation going on now for the righteous dead and the wicked dead. See, theirs is already, their probation is closed.
Correct.
So it is going on. because you may go by the way of the grave.
Well, I think the separation though has always existed because the Lord said
Right,
from the
there it
beginning,
is.
He'd put enmity between her seed and the seed of the serpent. You know, there would be a difference, there would be a distinction. And where the real problems, where the world has gotten into trouble is where they try to blend the two. They try to put the devil's truth with God's truth and make them merge together.
See, there's always been a separation.
So the separation necessarily takes place.
Right,
Well, that separation comes with death. You either was good
okay,
or,
yeah.
or you're gonna stay wicked.
But
Close
now,
the door for them.
on the other hand, at the close of probation that we will see, there will be a separation right before the close of probation, or there will be a separation before the close of
I
probation.
think most of life is actually this process of us learning to discern and separate ourselves from the trash we don't need that isn't good for us.
To
and
what we do need.
to bring us to the place where we are ready to accept what He's offered as being, you know, what the very best for us. But He's waiting for us to get into that mode where we say, okay, Lord, change my desires. Change what I want rather than just change my outside. Change what I want so that I don't want to do the things that the world does.
My comments were in connection with the what goes on here in this particular parable. The wicked are separated from the just and cast into the furnace of fire. Okay, and in the book of Revelation, of course, brings out that they're ultimately destroyed. And so the separation that I was referring to here, and this one in particular, I mean, is there anybody in the fire today?
No.
Okay, so there have been lots of people that have died, but there's nobody that's down in what we would call hellfire being tortured, right?
Yeah, and all the preachers put them all in heaven too before.
Well, yeah, apart from that,
Time,
apart from, you know,
That's right.
apart from that kind of
If people
thing.
could go to heaven based on funeral sermons, there'd be a lot more.
Right, right. But I'm just saying, there isn't a hell burning
You're talking
today.
about the final results.
The final results, right.
That's what you're talking about.
Right, so there, for example, Cain, who was a murderer, the first murderer, and obviously he was resistant to, he's presented in Scripture as being resistant. You know, he's not been down in hell burning somewhere for his choices, okay? He's waiting for this moment here that Jesus is talking about where there's a final separation, maybe that's what I should have said, and the wicked are destroyed and the righteous, of course, inherit the kingdom.
That is at the after 1,000, and that is
Yes.
when the earth is made over.
Exactly.
And there are lots of separations that take place. Can two walk together except they be agreed? You'll
Correct.
find the closer you get to the Lord, the more your relationships with others change. You know, if you were prone to hang out in the bars and drink with your friends, that begins to become less and less of an attraction as you get to know the Lord because it's no longer interesting, you know. You lose the desire for those things. So He starts changing you from the inside. And when you're changed from the inside, that's a very permanent change. You know, one man said, you know, after years of being a non-smoker, he said, the devil could not tempt me to smoke. He said, there's no temptation there. He said, but sometimes it is a temptation to commit murder because I want to hit somebody that's smoking in front of me. You know, but he said, there's no temptation to do that because it's no longer a love of my life. It's no longer what I want to be doing.
Something he loves more is taking greater precedence in his life.
Right. And so for all of us, that constant defining of our relationship with Him necessarily will create a separation from the things that don't match.
That's the only way I could quit, you know.
All right.
Cold
I
turkey.
mean, if I hadn't have done it that way, I wouldn't have made it.
Plenty of time.
Yeah. All right, so verse 53 there, Jesus is finishing up talking to the people, and he heads back to his own neighborhood. And it says, he taught in their synagogues so that they were astonished and said, you know, where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works?
Now,
And
listen, why were they astonished? They've heard parables all along from the priests and stuff. So why were they astonished when Christ gave parables?
Because you also have miracles behind it.
Well, but why? They have heard this their whole entire life. They've heard parables their whole entire life. Why were they astonished when Christ did it.
Because he didn't have the education that all the Pharisees and scribes had.
He wasn't
He
so
hadn't gone to their schools, he hadn't learned from their teachers. How
And
could
he
he
was
possibly
not
know these
considered
things?
a priest.
Right.
You're also hearing probably the
No,
most purest
not
of
at age
truth.
12.
He didn't have a degree, did he?
No.
He didn't
See,
have
and
that.
that's the problem today. If you don't have that degree, then you really don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, and so.
That's more or less what they're saying.
So here's a good illustration of really what it is that qualifies a person to present truth, right? Is it a piece of paper that somebody has signed off on, so, you know, you've gone through so much study and so many courses and whatnot, you've put the time in, so now you're qualified?
Well, look at the one that signed it. He got his from the same place.
Yeah, it's a system there. That, I mean, obviously, a degree can be beneficial, right? Could
Of
be
course.
beneficial.
I'd prefer the doctor that's working on me to be
Of course.
licensed and degreed.
Yeah, in most cases that would be preferable, you know. But, yeah, they're amazed because this guy is not supposedly educated in worldly philosophy
Right.
in school.
He's a construction
He's
worker.
just the carpenter's son, right?
And they say, we know his whole family. We've known them from the
his
time he
mother,
was
his
born.
brothers and sisters.
Whatever, we've known him all of their life. How could he possibly have all this wisdom?
But this was in Nazareth. And he told them, he
Right.
says, look, he said, a prophet is not accepted in his hometown.
Or his own
and
house.
that's because they did know who he was.
Mhm.
Or they thought they knew who he was.
Right. And so there, right, if you look at verse 58, of course, you just mentioned verse 57, basically. It says they were offended at him. Right? And so you can probably imagine how, you know, he's trying to blend in with this family. They don't really understand him. They don't understand his mission. They may not, they've probably heard or maybe even seen, witnessed some of these miracles that have taken place. And so everybody else is very impressed, but for some reason they're not very impressed.
Well, not only that, his own family thought he was crazy.
Yeah, so they might think it's just an abnormality or some kind of psychological illness, you know. I mean, who knows what they really...
Even demon-possessed women
yeah,
say it.
yeah, even that. So he has no honor there really in his own country, in his own house. And so look at verse 58. So he did not do many mighty works there because of their...
Unbelief. But he did do some.
Yeah,
He just didn't do very many of them, but he
Yeah.
did some.
sure. Well,
Enough that the people knew that he was different.
yeah. Do you think there was an attitude from his family and maybe the neighbors close by that, wow, this guy's got something, this guy's got a treasure that we really need?
Not his family then, no. Not until later.
It was,
His brothers didn't even recognize it until later on.
so it was taken for granted, right?
Sure.
I mean, all of what he was offering to the world was basically being taken for granted. And that's what we have to be careful of. What we have to be very careful of is taking things for granted. You know, I was just thinking the other day, you know, when I was getting ready to go to sleep, I was in a nice, cozy, comfortable bed. It was just so nice. And I thought, most of the people in the world right now, or when they lay down, they're not going to be experiencing what I'm experiencing right here, laying in this nice, comfortable bed. I mean, they might be on something that's a whole lot less comfortable, probably nothing at all. Maybe just the ground, you know, maybe some leaves or some brush or something. I mean, there are a lot of people in the world that don't have hardly anything that we would consider conveniences. They don't have a roof over their heads. They don't have a place to come and sit, you know, and open a book, you know, open the Bible and talk about these things. Well, I think we just take so many things for granted. We don't really appreciate all that God does for us. We've been so blessed. It's absolutely astounding. We need to really be thinking. We need to intentionally think about some of these things.
See, the people of the United States of America, they don't even look at God as giving them anything. It's look at what I've got, look at what I've done, look what I made of myself. They don't need God because they got everything they ever wanted.
Yeah, and there's no question that a lot of people have worked hard all their lives for the things that they have.
But who gave them the ability to do that?
Yes, it goes beyond way beyond our own efforts. It goes way beyond. I mean, just think, we could have been a person that was born in another place, another location, another place in the world. We could be that other person, but God has us here. You know? And so, really, does that create more of a challenge to take the gospel to the world, or less of a challenge? I think it creates more of a challenge, actually,
I'd say
because of
some of them,
exactly
like
what
you
you're saying.
said, don't need nothing.
Don't need
And
God.
And some do.
Yeah, so that creates more of a challenge when you think about.
But how many times have I talked that the United States of America will never get back to God until there's great, great, great adversity.
Hardship.
But we're going to have to face it. And that is the only way that they'll ever get back to God. And right here, and it won't be long, everybody will say, let's get back to God. Let's make America great again. Let's get back to God. And that's what's going to happen. Watch.
Okay, let's. We got a few minutes here yet, so let's go into.
11:50, Dad.
Pardon me?
It's only 11:50.
Yeah. Okay.
You got plenty of time. Go.
Let's go into the next story there. This is chapter 14 of Matthew. And in a way, one of the most pathetic stories, one of the saddest stories I think we could contemplate. But it's concerns John the Baptist, right? Now, we've, of course, known about John the Baptist. He was the forerunner of the Messiah. Dedicated his life. There were some special circumstances with his birth and upbringing and
Miracle
whatnot.
birth.
Yeah, so
Cousin of Jesus.
Elizabeth is his mom, and so we're so familiar with that story. But now this chapter 14 here, just kind of a summary of some of the circumstances surrounding his death. And it says here, at the time Herod, the Tetrarch, heard the report about Jesus and said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He's risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him." So, you know, Jesus is going around. He's not. He's doing his thing, and you can be certain that the political leaders are going to be taking notice of some of these things that are happening. And Herod had laid hold of John and bound him, put him in prison for the sake of Herodias. And who was Herodias?
His brother Philip's wife.
That was his brother's wife. And what was causing the friction here?
John had calling her a whore.
John had said, "It is not lawful for you to have her," right?
Yeah.
So there was some nonsense going on there. And although he wanted to put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. So what's Herod's intention here? What is he eventually going to do in his own thinking?
He's planning on releasing him because it even says he even enjoyed listening to him. He
Right.
liked you listening to him.
Right. So his ultimate intention was to, have a show of it. I'm still in charge, and put him in jail for a while.
And I punished him enough. Let's let him go.
Yeah, and then let him go. But when Herod's birthday was celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. And therefore he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. And she was probably 15, 16 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood. Just coming into the bloom of womanhood. So she's out
And he
there.
recognized that too.
Yeah, so she's out there, dancing around and whatnot. And everybody there is probably oohing and ahhing, saying, "Wow, this is great." And so Herod wants to impress everybody there, of course. And so you got a lot of ego, pride, a lot of things, going on here.
Well, he really jumped into it when he said, "Even up to half of my kingdom."
Yeah, he
So,
just put his foot right in his
Yeah.
mouth here.
Sounds like you had a little bit of old man's infatuation with a young girl there.
Yeah,
Let's
I'm
don't
sure
be
the
talking
wine,
about that now.
the wine was flowing. You know.
Let's don't be talking about that.
All right, dirty old man syndrome. How's
Yeah,
that?
the old man syndrome.
All right, so she eventually goes to her mother, and I think her mom, behind the scenes, had kind of always been hoping for this outcome.
She is wanting.
Been plotting, how can I, get rid of this guy who's incriminating my character and all that kind of thing. And besides that, wouldn't she rather be with the king instead of with, his
King's
brother?
brother.
So I think she had
She
aspirations.
got a
herself.
little more prestige that way.
Yeah, I think
Well,
so.
now wait a minute. Whoa, back up now. Both of them were kings.
Philip was king too?
Yes.
Over a different province?
Well, actually, he had two other brothers that was also kings.
Well, so, all right, so
How
she
many
had her.
kings they have?
Well, they had them in different areas.
Areas.
See, he was the king of Israel.
All right, so what did she eventually ask for?
The head of John the
Okay,
Baptist.
the head of John the
On
On,
Baptist.
platter.
on the charger.
Yeah, it says here in verse 9, the king was sorry. And even though he was sorry, he didn't have the guts,
backbone.
the guts, whatever you want to call it, to stand up and say, that's just absurd. In fact, I can even imagine him, there were people in this banquet from all over the place, the kingdom. I can imagine him wanting somebody else even to speak up. I mean, he himself felt like he was bound because of his oath, right? But I can imagine him kind of waiting, lingering a little bit, hoping that somebody around would speak up and say, hey, well, that's stupid, man. That's ridiculous. We can't do that.
But if he'd set the example, everybody else would have followed it because he was the king.
But then don't forget now that
The trouble is, he thought John the Baptist was a
True, he was a
prophet.
prophet, yeah.
there was possibly 1,000 people there, royal people,
Sure.
including the emperor, who was over him, was there at that time.
Yeah, he got
And whenever he put his foot in his mouth and said, anything you want, okay, my word is my bond. I've done said it.
Yep.
You
And it says here,
Hey.
because of the oath and because of those who sat with him. So again, he didn't want to.
this is all royalty we were talking about.
Yeah, he
now.
didn't want to seem fickle or, undecisive and so forth. So he commanded it be given her, and so,
Paid a price for it too.
so he
died a very
sent,
horrible death.
and of course John was beheaded, the head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she took it to her mom. And then the
What
disciples
was the
went,
girl's name?
then the disciples went
Rhoda.
and.
Salome.
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 Salami.
Salami, bologna.
Salome, yeah. Well, the first thing I would have done, after being put in that position, and I mean, that really made me look bad. First thing I'd have done, I'd send her and her mother both to the wash house, and they'd have started washing clothes for people. They'd have no longer been royalty. I'd have got rid of them too, because if they can do that to me now, what are they going to do to me later?
They should have let John escape.
Well, a lot of people, of course, one of the big questions that probably comes up in maybe a lot of people's minds, and certainly back then too, why didn't Jesus step in ahead of time?
Well, because it was supposed to be fulfilled.
I mean, he was the forerunner, and he did a lot to promote the cause and the kingdom of heaven, and to kind of prepare the way.
Well,
Why-
they even said there's
why
nobody
wouldn't-
greater than John the Baptist.
Why wouldn't Jesus step in, do you think? And
Why did he step in when anybody else was martyred for their faith too? There are lots of people that have suffered for their faith, for the truth.
Well, John was an example.
I mean, many of the prophets of the Old Testament were killed.
In much worse ways than beheading.
Yeah.
Well, we find a similar story we looked at earlier. Remember the story of Lazarus? Right? The story of Lazarus, Jesus knew that he was sick, and he was a personal friend of the family, right? Martha and Lazarus, they were very close friends. Pardon me?
And Mary.
Very close friends. And so there were people that were, even the scripture says, there were people that were questioning, well, look, you knew he was sick. Why didn't you just speak the word and heal him, right?
He could have, didn't have to go nowhere.
Yeah, he wouldn't have to go anywhere. And so I think, it's important to recognize that
But didn't something
Bad
greater
things.
come out of it?
Well, yeah, okay,
See?
there you go. So the Bible says that all things work together for good. We
those
don't,
who
we don't
don't
wanna
roll.
think, we don't wanna think that, maybe our role, we could experience something negative or detrimental. That could be our plot or our role in actually God accomplishing what He wants to accomplish. But can we come to the place where we are okay with that? That we can say, whatever it takes, Lord.
There's no
We
safer
have to
place
be at
be.
that place or
Yeah,
you ain't gonna make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the safest place to be, right?
I mean,
In other words-
ultimately, whether we die in some untimely fashion or whether we live long enough to die, death is the lot of every human being
Right.
until the Lord comes. So we know that death is going to be our lot.
Listen,
So if you don't care whether you die now or whether you die later, wherever you are, you're safe in His hands.
see, I keep telling Edna, if you were to die, your next conscious thought, your very next conscious thought is eternity with Christ. Who in the world wouldn't want to step through that door right there into heaven? That's what it amounts to.
Yeah.
I mean, you ain't gonna count time while you're in the grave. Shucks, your next conscious thought. I mean, you're going from this garbage can into
Paradise.
yeah.
You're not gonna be
Who in
looking
the
at the
world
wristwatch,
wouldn't
right?
do that?
You're looking at the watch.
Into the start of the building of paradise.
You
There's
can
still 1,000 years
be
yet
buried
until that
alive,
happens.
That's right.
and time will
Well, that
stop.
time you get to hang out in heaven.
You don't believe it out them German guys over there, taking ground in that steel box for 10 years.
Yeah.
All right, so what was the benefit, if any, of John being out of the picture? I mean, he was out of the picture in
Well,
prison to a certain extent,
see-
but now permanently out of the picture. Was
But remember now, as long as John was here, I'm not going to say there was a competition, not between John and Christ, but between the disciples.
there was.
You see, there was always a competition. Well, with John, first thing John said though, the very first thing he says, there's the Lamb of God right there. He says, he told his disciples, follow them.
That He must
Follow him.
increase and I must decrease.
He said, "I
Right, you see, he had to be removed so that there would be, number one, no competition between them, and number two, so that everybody would be directed to Christ and not to himself.
They both had disciples.
And you saw how even in the early Christian church, there was division. I came from Paul and I was baptized by Peter, that somehow there were different levels of their Christian experience because of who they were connected with.
See, John and Andrew were the ones that he was talking to. The fishermen, when he told them to go, he said, go follow Christ. Well, when Christ called them, that wasn't the first thing they ever heard about religion. They already knew they'd learned from John.
And so God's ways aren't our ways, and ultimately we want God's will to be accomplished, whatever that might mean for us personally or individually. We want the cause of the kingdom to be the priority and to be paramount, and that's where the emphasis should always be on what God's will is and what He wants to accomplish or what He needs to accomplish. So.
I guess I'll share one last thing too, is that I think the whole event was also prophetic of, and symbolic of things that are supposed to take place at the end of time, where you have, things like the woman representing a church, and of course John representing the true people of God, speaking out against the atrocities of political leadership or religion, whatever, but it's the woman that is seducing the political power, that convinces the political power to persecute the religious power, or the religion that is speaking out against what's happening. And as a result, they're persecuted.
Right, so you see a microcosm of really what will play out at the end particularly. You've got the woman riding the beast. That's exactly what you have. You have a corrupt woman, which would have been Herodias, having, really playing and manipulating the circumstances to cause the political.
Manipulating multiple royalties.
Right, multiple. So, yeah, I mean, there's no question. I mean, that's where you're going with that, right? The whole thing. So, yeah, that's very much a little micro dot of what'll play out at the end, which will also be devastating, and people may question, but it's also necessary, right? It's a necessary part of what happens at the end time. The unmasking, you know, of the corruption that exists, you know, within political entities, within corrupt church organizations, etc. So that very same scenario will play out at the end. So, very good. And of course, the Bible tells us that there will be people that will be martyred for their faith. And Scripture really says that, you know, God will end up with a small remnant that will live through to the very end, who He will choose. Just like He chose Gideon's 300, He'll choose the remnant at the end. We call them the wise virgins. We call them the remnant. We call them the 144,000, whatever you want to call them. A small group that God will use to take them through all the way to the very end. And actually the same scenario that existed in the Jezreel Valley during the time of Gideon will play out on a global scale at the very end. And the result will be exactly the same as well. God will receive all the glory and all the honor for the victory that is accomplished.
Well, you know, we got Christians in the Middle East dying every day just off the effect.
And JD had shared one thing about.
Rose, question?
And
Sorry.
JD,
I'm oblivious this morning.
and JD had shared in regards to what I had shared there, that anyone who dared speak against Herod and Herodotus' illicit relationship would suffer the same fate
Sure.
in regards to that same.
That was an example,
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly. He was also used for an example for that.
It was the same situation that happened with Ahab and Jezebel.
Yeah.
You know, spoke against
Yeah.
them, and they ended up being eaten by the dogs.
Of course, Elijah got out perfectly unscathed in that one. And he
Of
ended
course,
up being translated.
I see a kind of a similar connection too with with Eve. That kind of allowed herself to be made the wrong choices and wandering from Adam and kind of unleashed sin on the planet. Got the ball rolling in that direction. And Abel was her second oldest or second born, I think. Could have been second born. Ended up being sacrificed as a result by Cain. And here you see, just like you have a woman instrumental taking down Abel in that regard, you have a woman behind the scenes taking down John the Baptist.
Of course, on the other spectrum too is a woman that kind of brought the redemption into the world.
Yeah. So, a woman being married, right? So yeah, it's interesting how we can make those parallels and applications. Okay, so I guess that's probably a good place for us to stop, and we can pick up with the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. And we'll go ahead and jump into that next week. So, we all good? All right, so let me see if I can get the ladies in the kitchen there to pause for just a minute, and we'll have a word of prayer together. So, Elijah, you want to go ahead and close this in prayer?
Sure. Hey, Renee.
Lord, thank you so much for this wonderful day that you've allowed us to come together as a group and to discuss these amazing points that you've left for us to read and study about. And there's endless bits of information to take in, and we just ask that as we spend the rest of this day doing what we do, that you would give us the heart and the mind to contemplate the things that we've been reading about and studying about, and that you would give us deeper insights and deeper understanding as you see fit to give to us, so that we can effectively share it with the rest of the world. Lord, it's a very high calling you've given your people, and we just pray that you can give us the strength to rise to the occasion. Please bless us now for the rest of the day. Help our conversations to be centered around you, And may everything we do today bless and honor you in some way. And we also pray for the food, that we can all enjoy the fellowship together and give the fullest amount of glory to your name in everything that we do. It's my prayer in your Son's name. Amen.
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 Okay, well, thank you for that, and thank
Glad
you,
you-
everyone, for your comments and your thoughts and for sharing. I want to encourage you to go ahead and read ahead so that each week we can come prepared to maybe bring some things out. This isn't a sermon or a lecture, so it's important to have your thoughts as well. And we want to thank you for joining us online today. We hope to see you again next week, same time, same place. And if you can't make it here while we're having our study, then we hope that you'll go ahead and check it out at your convenience. But anyway, God bless. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time at homechurch.us. Okay, everybody. Great job.